And we're live. It is Monday, December 9th, the year of our Lord 2024. 8 o'clock a.m. The sun is not shining in D.C., but it sure is shining in Damascus, where maybe for the first time in 50 years, the birds are chirping. It's going to be a great fucking day. And you are watching Dogshirt TV, which is, as you know, a revolution in morning television. Before we get into it, I just want to remind you all that the Sol Invictus sale on Dogshirt Daily subscriptions is ongoing. Half off. You can join the celebrated Greek chorus / collegium, which means if you were already a member, a paid subscriber to Dogshirt Daily, you would be able to interrupt Ammar Abdulhamid with a question, as I'm sure that somebody is going to do over the course of the next hour. So if you're watching this on YouTube, come into the light, join us, interrupt me, interrupt Ammar. We are live with my old friend Ammar. I met Ammar, I want to say in 2008 or 9, when he was visiting a visiting fellow at Brookings.
2004.
2004. I'm sorry. Yeah. To my great chagrin, he left Brookings and went back to Damascus, where he blogged against the regime. Hello, Holly Berkley Fletcher. Ammar, Holly, Ammar, where he blogged against the regime until, Ammar, correct me if I'm getting the details of this wrong. He was, the regime made him the kind of offer you can't refuse and that does not occur in non-totalitarian governments, which is go to prison for 25 years or become a minister in the government. That was the offer, right?
The offer actually was even worse because it was up to make the fate of a sheikh, a Kurdish sheikh called Mashouk al-Ghaznawi, who was found dead. His body was found dead after disappearing for a few days along the tracks, the rail tracks connected Damascus and Aleppo. He said, make this fate or become a minister.
I see. Yeah. I didn't realize there was a death involved. I thought it was long prison sentence. But yeah, so Ammar chose option 3, which was not on offer, which was to jump in the car, drive to Beirut, and fly to Washington and ask for political asylum. He has become a U.S. citizen. He is a great American and a commentator on a poet, a novelist, a commentator on all things Syria. And so when I thought, who do we want to hear from on the fall of Bashar Assad, with whom he went to grade school, as I recall. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
You and Bashar were played on the playground together?
And others we never did play. We were not friends. even at that time, we were not friends, and people sort of knew that. I remember one day, and Bashar went to a school called Laik, and I went to a school called the Frere, and it's all based schools that were run by Catholic priests, but then these priests were thrown out of Syria in the late 60s. So when we were in school, it was run by a Christian administration, but approved by the Ba'ath Party. So they were private schools. But because of security reasons, Bashar would often come to my school and attend classes there. So he graduated officially from Laik, but he attended the last couple of years or 3 years in the Frere. And we had sort of minor contacts. We were in the same playground, as you said, but we never really friends. There was a rumor one day that we had even a fight, and I know we did for a while, but I can't remember what it was about. And people immediately, sort of, the students jumped between us and separated us. And there was a rumor that in the fight, he told me, don't you know who I am? I am the son of the president. And that my reply was, don't you know who I am? I'm the son of the best actress in this country, and people would rather watch her series than your father's stupid speeches. And that was a rumor, though. It never really did happen. But
so it didn't happen?
It did not happen. We had this scuffle. I can't remember what's it about. And immediately, like within seconds, people separated us. And that was it. That was, my enmity or
was born.
was born.
So it took, I don't know, what year was that?
That was 1979, I would say.
Okay, so it took an additional 40 years, but
Yes.
you have prevailed in the scuffle. You're in Washington, he's in Moscow. How do you feel? Like, this is the guy who drove you and your family out of Damascus, your hometown. You've been a refugee / asylee for a long time, and before becoming a citizen here. It must be like an amazing, emotional moment for you to watch this fall.
The personal angle for me was always, in a sense, limited. I have no reason to feel anything for him, about him, really, except that he was a dictator and the son of a dictator. I mean, personally, I wasn't impacted by any of the policies he did.
Wait a minute, you're living in Washington, not in Damascus. What do you mean you weren't?
Before I became an opposition, when I was in Syria. So I had no reason to even be an opposition on a personal level. My opposition was born purely out of my conversion into classical liberalism, you can say, in the United States. My embrace of American values when I was a student, before I came to Syria. I went back to Syria in 1994. So I went back with the hope that things are going to be changing also in Syria after the end of the Cold War and whatever. And what I saw was simply a regime still entrenched and people still fearing the president, the father at the time, and pictures are everywhere. And Assad, Bashar, is being prepared to take, after the death of his brother in a car accident, that he's now being groomed to become the successor. And all of that was too macabre for me. And then when I traveled across Syria, and I saw basically that you go in a time capsule back in time whenever you leave Damascus or whenever you leave Aleppo. The rest of Syria was underdeveloped so severely and neglected that I could see trouble brewing. And step by step, this really led me to speak out and then to become an activist by the late 1990s. The moment came when I voted no to Hafez al-Assad in his last referendum. And from that moment, it became a matter of principle to oppose both the father, then he passed away, and then Assad, the son. To me, and that sort of culminated in my exile in 2005. But even then, I still led a group in Damascus of activists that was very active in the early days of the revolution, violence activists. And we were sort of, when the things turned into a military operation, we were sort of sidelined, like so many sort of moderates and so many secularists and the few of us liberal who were there. So in that sense, my opposition was always based on concepts and ideas, not on some kind of really personal vendetta, as I might have hinted jokingly a few minutes ago. So I see him going. The good thing about it for me is that what he symbolized, especially over the last 14 years, is oppression in its starkest form. And when you see these videos coming out of the Sednaya prison, and you see the conditions, and you hear the stories now, the stories you've heard before, but now you can see the place. And I'm reminded of the report that was issued years ago on the industrial scale massacre of the death industry in Syria, of the killing industry in Syrian prisons, especially this Sinai prison. And now there are even reports of secret prisons under state institutions like the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Agriculture, and the university and whatever. So there are things that are going to be found out, and that shows you how terrible the reach of this murderous regime was. And when it's sort of like the killing fields underground, basically, 3 levels down. When you see that, you realize that he had to go. I mean, there is no argument for, what would come after will be worse. Well, probably it might be. I don't know, but yeah, it's better a long journey through hell than life in eternity in purgatory. It's life under Assad is devoid of hope, and it really felt like purgatory. They even used the term forever, Assad forever, Assad forever. Well, we ended forever. Now we have to deal with the consequences. And yes, they are not necessarily going to be rosy. There is no doubt after such a trauma, you are going to be going through a period of trial by fire, and it could be a long period. But it was necessary. It is worth it. We needed it.
So I wanna come to the what's coming question momentarily, but I also want to say that when all the same arguments that people are making, what's coming could be worse, you could make that about Stalin's death.
Yes.
Right? You could say, well, Beria could take over, right? But there's always a chance that, these moments are moments of opportunity. And, Gaddafi's death does not necessarily mean, a warlord driven division of the country. It in fact did mean that in practice, but you always have an opportunity in these situations to carve something better. And by the way, incrementally better is still better. And I don't want to be I don't want to be seen as saying, oh, like the fall of the dictator is going to be wonderful, and be naive about what's coming. But I do think we have to start with the idea that you have an opportunity for something that is not genocidal, which when you're dealing with something that is genocidal is that's just a good,
Yes, it is. In fact, I mean, this is exactly it. None of us is sort of like going into this period of transition with our eyes closed. We know that there are challenges. We know that there are extremist elements. We know that even the pragmatist elements have ideologies that do not coincide with the worldview of liberal democracy or democracy that the nonviolent protesters who started this revolution in 2011 had in mind. We know that there are major differences. We know that there are factions. We know that there is a question of Arabs and Kurds, and we know that Turkish dabbling will continue. There will be other regional still powers wanting to dabble in Syrian affairs. And look, Israel immediately moved into areas in Syria to fortify its borders and create a new buffer zone in addition to the Golan Heights that have been sort of taken over. So it's there are a lot of challenges. We know that, and we are not going to have prepackaged answers to any of them. What we have to do is be ready to talk and discuss and brainstorm together collectively now on how we can deal with that. And we might fail. I mean, liberals like me have minimal chance. I've always known that from the beginning of my activist career of actually having major impact. But I was always saying this struggle is generational. whether we like it or not. We are trying to fashion consciousness here. We're trying to fashion a greater awareness. These values of liberal democracy did not spring overnight in Western part of the world and in areas that adopted liberal democracy. They came as a result of long-term struggle. Where and philosophers writing and examining their own history and tradition. We haven't had yet, by the way, 100 years after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire and the beginning of what's so-called the Arab awakening in the late 19th century, we still haven't had any serious scholarly work that tried to sort of re-examine our past and our history from a critical perspective, not just a celebratory perspective. Oh, we were great once. Who cares? The kind of criticism you see in scholarly works in the US and other countries, of examining the traditions, looking at slavery and saying, where did you go wrong? How did you go wrong? That you don't see. And countries that don't, and cultures that don't have this kind of critical re-examination and reassessment of the heritage have a long way to go before they have something like liberal democracy. So we're not going to have that. That's out of the question for now. Are we going to have an extreme version of Islamic rule? Is it going to be like the Islamic Republic of Iran on steroids, the Sunni version of it? Or is it going to be a Sunni version but light? Without sort of like radical dogmas and exporting the revolution and trying to sort of create havoc in neighboring countries and expand, terrorist cells and people come for meetings, to terrorist groups in order to exchange expertise and then go and create mayhem elsewhere. By the way, this used to happen under the days of Hafiz al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad, but this is not what we want. Now, Jolani's statements, this leader of HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Front for the Liberation of the Levant, is it real? We don't know. Is he capable of, is it shared widely in his circles? We don't know. Is he capable of containing the radical elements which are already uploading videos saying we want an Islamic State and we want a caliphate and we want to go to Jerusalem and to Mecca? Is he capable of containing them? Are they containable? Are they small elements within his alliance? These are questions that we have no answers to at this stage, but we will need answers to in the next few days. And Israel's challenge has already sort of presented itself on the scene because it's directly related to radical elements. Why did they fear of change in Syria? Because of that. So we need answers to that. We need answers soon. The thing that happened just a few hours ago is encouraging, is that Al-Jolani's or his Salvation government issued a statement forbidding people from saying, from imposing the headscarf or the veil on women anywhere in Syria, and from even talking to women or encourage them to cover up or be decent. Do not interfere. They were very clear. Do not interfere with how women are dressed. That's actually surprising considering the Islamist ideology that they have, and considering that the first act usually of an Islamist movement takeover of anything is
that's usually the first thing they do.
Cover up. So in fact, here is that don't even say the word cover up. So that's encouraging, and we need more sort of steps like that. And if they are not going to be radical at home, I'm hoping that they are not going to be radical abroad. And it's not going to be, we're not going to be radical at home, but we're going to export our radicalism elsewhere. We're hoping for that kind of a balance, but we have no answers for now.
Holly.
What is the role of the U.S. or other sort of liberal? I mean, assuming the U.S. is in a position and to have a good influence. Obviously, our efforts at nation building have been not great in the last couple decades.
Yeah.
And it seems like, I don't know, maybe less is more. But what is your view on what the U.S. can do to support this transition?
I remember back and this is when I actually was meeting with occasionally Tamara, by the way, Ben, before we've met. I remember
Tamara is my, for those who don't know, Tamara is my wife.
Okay. And so I was attending conferences, and you can see this preparation between 2001 2003 for the US invasion. And I always had an issue is that you are not going to be able to handle what comes next, because we require a cultural shift basically, and nation building is not something that the US can do because it requires generations. Are you going to stay for generations in Iraq? And I wrote a lot about it at the time, and I remember basically making a joke: Are you sort of going to bring us anchovies with the pizza of democracy or something along these lines? It's really not how you're going to do it. So I'm in a sense glad that we are not going to talk about US trying to build any nations anymore, because I love the United States. I don't want it to see it mired in this kind of struggles. We want support for indigenous forces. Now, the indigenous forces are troublesome, the ones who are making decisions. But that does not mean they are not engageable if they are pragmatic. So what the US can do is engage. What the US can do is wait for signs and ask for signs and be reasonable about the extent to which. It's not going to be immediate sort of like shift in thinking, but already there have been things said by al-Jolani that indicates a willingness to work with everyone. I mean, if he's willing to give Iran guarantees, to talk with their FM basically and give them guarantees, you are not going to assault any, the Iranian embassy or any of the assets basically that Iran considered strategic in Syria. So, in other words, the holy shrines. And Russia, we are not going to sort of like take over the ports and or destroy any of your assets in Syria as well, in the coast. So if he's willing to say that to Iran and Syria and Russia, he is definitely will be willing, in my opinion, to talk to the US. And already messages have been sent to him through the Turkish government. So I think the complication factor in this regard is the designation and the bounty put on his head. This has to be lifted. I mean, it's not because I love the guy or I trust him 100%, but perhaps after a certain period of time and some initial exchange of messages, you need to lift it in order to be able to sit down with him and see what relationship you can forge. And this might be the best way to, in fact, support his pragmatism and to test to see if it's real. So that's the only thing that can be done at this stage, really.
So I want to follow up on that. There's been a lot of noise and anxiety expressed about HTS's history, who Jomani is as a person and his own background. What do we know about that? How bad is the history here? And how and I mean, you've talked about some of the moderation, but it's moderation from what baseline is the...
Well, he used to be ISIS. He used to work with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He might have American blood on his hands. But America has talked to people who had American blood on his hands before.
Yeah, that's never really stopped us.
And it's actually one of the good things about the US is that their willingness to bury hatchets and and even when it's not really burying the hatchet, but a temporary sort of convergence of interest, they're willing to explore that. And that's the US pragmatism. Pragmatism is part and parcel of the US makeup. It's not part and parcel of our own mindset. That's why I'm interested to see al-Jolani's basically saying things that are pragmatic. So no, the background is bad, but at the same time, as he said in his CNN interview, he grew up in a sense. I mean, people change in time. And you cannot deny him that, because when he was with ISIS, he was in his early 20s, I think. And I remember, and when I was 20 years old, I was a radical Islamist, or I had, my
Oh
history
yeah,
being,
that's part of Ammar's background I didn't mention.
So I was not part of any group. I was here in the U.S. when I was a radical Muslim, and it lasted for about a couple of years. 1 year of them when I was really fire and brimstone kind of guy. But then I slowly changed, and by the mid-20s, I was an atheist. Yeah. And
So
thanks to the writings of the founding fathers of the U.S. So basically, people do change. I do not anticipate al-Jolani to become a liberal, but he may not necessarily be that ISIS radical that he
okay,
used to be.
so let's use your background in Islamism to assess this for a minute,
Yeah.
because we have a model of kind of Muslim Brotherhood, non-terrorist movements that range from the the Salafist parties and the Brotherhood parties in Egypt, to the Turkish government, to the political party, the United Arab List in Israel, right? That's a pretty big spectrum. We don't have a model of, at least to my knowledge, of moderate militia uh, brotherhood offshoot, like models of Al Qaeda / ISIS groups that come off and moderate and become reasonable partners. What is that? What is a Jomani, a moderated Jomani who in power actually look like?
I think now that's a very tough question, to be honest with you. It's, in a sense, we're witnessing something new, exactly because, or could be witnessing something new, to be specific. Because yes, I do not know, and I cannot point a finger at a precedent where an Islamist group moderated. And except in probably brief one in Tunisia, when Ghanouchi was basically moderated the Muslim Brotherhood, trying to
Right,
transform
but
it
that
into
comes out of a political party, the
exactly
sort
not
of
a
the
militia.
more
Exactly.
Erdogan kind of Egypt model. It's not, he's not a militia, right? He's
Exactly.
not a
Exactly.
he doesn't have troops.
Yeah. So basically, the only thing I can point to is this: it's not the that we are going to look for precedent elsewhere. We have to look at Syrian culture itself. And Syrian culture itself the Islamism has always been more moderate. They only got to be radical when Assad took over and tried to impose a minoritarian rule without mentioning even. I mean, he could have actually asked for rights. He could have said, look, we need to go beyond this dichotomy between Sunni and Alawites and whatever. But no, there was no mention of that. This was a military junta taking over the army, then gradually taking over the state institutions, and trying to say, look, we're not that. We're leftists, we're socialists. But in reality, there was this sectarian element at play. So that it brought out the sectarian element at play within the Brotherhood as well. Who by their very ideology were very susceptible to that anyway. So but before that, the Islamism in Syria was far more moderate, and it's more like working with the political class and given leeway to the rulers to sort of do what's best for the country. Does this and there was a lot of pragmatism in the relationship between the clerical sort of establishment and the political establishment, and can we return to that? That's the whole question is, or have we far gone beyond it? Is this something that we can tap into again? Is this saying, okay, let's go back to who we are and be a little bit more sort of like relaxed? So it will be therefore a kind of a conservative state rather than an Islamist state in that strict sense of the word. That is really the question. So we do have to see if the Syrian culture can prevail again, or has it been so transformed under Ba'ath rule and now under Islamist challenges that we are not going to be able to go back to that, and or we're going to have some kind of a hybrid situation. So we don't have therefore a clear precedence, but the hope is to see that if the previous cultural norms can reassert themselves, and they are not necessarily beautiful in everything, they are not there. It's a tolerance rather than acceptance, of difference. But but that still be good in the current circumstances if this is what happens, and it will buy us time to build something better in the future.
I want to ask about two regional players. You've mentioned, well, maybe we should ask about three, right? You've mentioned the Israeli actions in the south. Also, this is a huge strategic defeat for Iran. And there's also the small matter that, Jomani has been backed by the Turks. And this is, among other things, a significant victory for Turkey. So talk about the region, and this is a lot of different actors here, each with their own equities that this new transitional regime is going to have to balance and play off against each other. What does it look like?
It is, I mean, the sort of, if you looked at the conflict in Syria from the prism of regional geopolitics of recent times, you are going to see that the Turkish-Qatari alliance emerged as the main victor, or at this stage, and it could be that Qatari money is what's funding through Turkey the ability of HTS to immediately funnel funds and promise raises to the salaried employees and the liberated areas, and and be able to immediately undertake these projects. I mean, when within days you have of the fall of Aleppo, the takeover of Aleppo, you have Turkish cell company basically being established under HTS. It's supposed to be a company controlled by HTS, but the service is provided through Turkey and Turkish lira and all of that. So basically, we're being integrated into the Turkish economy, and all of that requires funding. And Turkey does have, can fund it, but not for the entire country. So there is Qatar behind that as well, I would imagine. They emerge as a victor in their rivalry with UAE and Saudi Arabia, and this is definitely a blow to Iran. Iran now has been losing out, and I think that means after they will experience a situation very similar to what Syria experienced after they withdrew from Lebanon in 2005. The struggle goes to Damascus. So now the struggle is going to Tehran. This is where the battle is going to be. So Tehran, if not in a year, it could be in a month, it could be in a year, it could be in a number of years, but there will be trouble. And already the people are restless. Yes, that's where the confrontation is going to be now for Iran.
And what about the Israelis? I look, their action today suggests a certain anxiety.
Yes.
On the other hand, Syria was the major land bridge from for Hezbollah, which has just been strategically defeated to a large degree from Iran. And now all of a sudden you have Hezbollah defeated in Syria in defense of the regime by this Sunni force that has not been focused on Israel, although it presumably is very hostile. How should we understand Israel's posture here?
Well, remember the clean break theory?
No.
The clean break paper that Netanyahu and other neocons signed in the mid-1990s, basically about the fact that the Arab-Israeli struggle is not the central struggle and the region needs to be reshaped. Netanyahu has always been on board with that project. He has always not believed in the two-state solution. He always wanted to see a changing regional dynamics, and he's gotten his way. He knew what he was doing, in my opinion, ever since October 7th. Is this bad or good? it depends on how people deal with it. It's so far it's good in a sense for Israel if we overlook the tragedy of the Palestinians for now and the consequences of that. But it's good in a sense that its enemies are weakened severely, and it's understandable that they will go actually into Syria and try to create that buffer zone from that perspective. They know that they are now going to deal with an unexpected consequences to their operations in Syria. That it's not a weakened Assad, but a regime change. They created the conditions for it. Yes, the final blow was definitely by HTS, and it was taken without necessarily showing much deference or taking orders from Turkey. They did it, imposed it, because they were tired of waiting for approval from outside. But at the end of the day, that creates a problem for Israel, and now they have to manage it. If the pragmatism, which goes back to the old question of Jolani, is real, there could be a chance for the future in a period of time to see perhaps a Syrian transitional government or the post-Syrian transitional government, the one that gets elected, negotiating over the return of these new areas and buffer zone, which mean in a sense de facto recognition of Israel and a peace process, not for the Golan, but for the return of these small areas and some so that could be, you could see it. I could see the possibility of that.
And do you understand the buffer area? I mean, Israel has two major interests here. One is one that nobody talks about in the United States, which is that there are these Golan Druze families who have villages that are across the border in Syria, and their families are there, and the Israelis kind of protect those villages. The other is a more strategic interest, which is they don't want anybody coming close to that line. Is this about both, or is it about just the second?
It could be an element of both, because many of the Druze now in the Syrian in the Golan, that's now part of Israel, are no longer comfortable, especially after watching what Assad did. They're sort of happy being in Israel, comfortable, and more of them have accepted now Israeli citizenship. I do not know. I think all of them now are Israeli citizens. So in that sense, having some reunion by having Israel take over more land might be good, but the reality is, I don't think that's the important part, because most of these families are no longer living along the border. Most of their family members are in Damascus and other areas of Syria. So family reunion is not going to happen this way. So I would imagine that no, there is a serious strategic calculation and fear of emerging jihadi cells along the border. So by creating a buffer zone, they're protecting their citizens basically in the Golan Heights. And again, the issue, and now, I mean, they are taking over heights in, very strategic peaks, and that gives them a view over the valley. So now they have the entire valley area exposed. If any radical movement or any attempt of infiltration will happen, they are bound to spot it ahead of time and be able to respond. The question is, if Jolani is not able to contain the radical cells, the radical elements, are we going to have the kind of confrontation that will bring about, if not Gaza-like condition, then Lebanese-like condition like we've seen recently? Are we going to see extensive bombing of Damascene and Syrian infrastructure? These are the risks that radicals pose to Syria by being radical. So Israel will defend itself. Israel, whether we like it or not, whether you accept Israel's existence or you don't, it exists. It's there. They're going to defend themselves. I mean, so you have to be aware of that. And I think this is a challenge for Islamists. They have never really had to moderate vis-a-vis the Arab-Israeli struggle. They moderated on everything,
except the brief period in Egypt where they played ball.
Actually. Exactly, they maintained the peace treaty, exactly, because they were in power at the time. So yeah, let's see if now that percolates in their minds, and.
So I have one more large subject that I want to address, but first, Holly, Ev, do you have questions?
I might have one, but Holly, do you have something? In this trying of moderating the more radical forces, what's the role of the diaspora?
Okay, that's a good question, because diasporas are dangerous, or could be. The Palestinian diaspora is far more radical than the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and their demands perhaps exceeds what the people in the West Bank and Gaza would want, and would be willing to settle for, because they're under fire. They're the ones who are in the front line. So will Syrian diaspora be a radicalizing element? In this case, no. It might be the moderating element, because, but I don't want them to be the whitewashing element, that they will overlook the radicalism of al-Jolani if it emerges, and they will overlook whatever misdeeds that rebel forces will do, and that they will fall into, and they're, basically justifying everything that will happen on the basis that we're just rid of Assad. So I want them, there is a chance that this might happen, and some of them will probably go down that route. But for now, I'm heartened by the fact that many of them say, we understand the challenges. We know that this is not the ideal alternative we wanted. We know we have troubles, and therefore they really want to see themselves playing a moderator role, and be part of, by being part of, returning and being part of the decision-making process, or being the connection between the Salvation Government in Jolani and the countries in which they are residing. So that the two possibilities are emerging: the negative one and the positive one. But so far, the one that seems to be the ethos that seems to be emerging is that we know we're going to have to fight for secularism or for moderation. That is encouraging about that, and it seems to me, therefore, that the diaspora, if this ethos prevails, the diaspora will play a positive role in the transformation of Syria in the future.
I want to ask about territorial control, because one thing the Salvation Government does not have is control over the whole country.
Yes.
You have as you noted, a Israeli buffer zone in the south. You have a very large Kurdish enclave, with American support in the north, and of course you have within the Sunni forces, you have the ones that are HTS controlled, and then you have sort of more secular nationalist forces as well. And so I'm wondering, that does raise a Libya concern of immediate division into warlordism and to local fights among the groups. It also raises the possibility of whether some kind of unity government is possible, or sort of transitional government is possible. What do you how quickly could this go? How bad? And what are the opportunities for a responsible transition leading to elections?
This is again one of those other the issues that that are very difficult to predict, but at the same time, I will tell you how the lay of the land is, the way I see it. We expected at one point, myself included, that the maximum that will be had was Damascus, that the coastal enclave will remain there, and that Russia will protect it, and that they will fall. You will have sort of kind of federated structure with the coastal areas by themselves, the Kurdish area by themselves, the Druze areas in the south, and then the areas in central Damascus, in central Syria, from Aleppo down to Damascus. So this is not happening. The coastal areas have sort of like surrendered completely. Why? Because Assad has run away and Russia has run away. There is no defenders, and the people who are left were gangs, and people don't want to be ruled by gangs. So they opened their cities to rebels to come in, and the rebels didn't move in with force. They moved in through local proxies, basically, and they allowed basically the councils to emerge, the notables, the rule by notables. Right now, what's happening in the coastal area. So and everywhere really in Syria. So in that sense, we are not going to see that structure. This leaves the Kurds really only as a question, because they have a strong militia, but they also have an existential threat. There is one group, the Syrian National Army, which is a name that can be deceiving to some people. It's actually not the Syrian National Army associated with the regime. It's a group of mercenaries, to be honest. There is no other word for them, that were formed by Turkey in order to fight the Kurds. They
and
did
just
so.
for those who do not understand the regional dynamic here between Turkey and the Kurds, the Kurdish group in question, which is called the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, is a offshoot of the PKK, the Kurdistani party from Turkey, which Turkey has fought a long war against, that it regards, as does the United States, as a terrorist group. The Syrian offshoot of the PKK, however, is the closest U.S. partner in the region, and we have 900 Marines there who are working with the SDF. So, but the Turks hate the SDF because it's a PKK offshoot, and they regard it as having irredentist territorial designs on parts of Turkey, and they stood up the Syrian National Army to confront it. Is that a fair summary, Ammar?
It's quite a fair summary. It's very accurate. And reality is, with SDF in control of these areas along the borders with Turkey, it's provided the PKK with depth, a strategic depth inside Syria. And this is something that the Turkish people don't want to see, that the Turkish government doesn't want to see. That's why they try to create a buffer zone populated by Syrian Arabs, refugees, basically. And they succeeded in creating a pocket, but it's not continuously I think they'd want to basically try. There is still, right now, there are battles being fought for a city called Manbij that's controlled by the SDF. And that the Turkey want to see the SDF relinquish control of it, and they are not succeeding. The SDF have really become a very professional fighting force, and I think this is going to be the question. If you are going to go into an Arab-Kurdish confrontation, if HTS joined, because HTS have said that they don't want this battle, so if the HTS join this battle with the Turkish proxies, it's going to become debilitating. It's going to have an impact. It's going to create. I would imagine they will succeed, especially that the U.S. troops might be pulled out. And Trump said that I don't want anything to do with it. I want the troops to come back. And if he stuck to his word after January 20, that means the Kurds are on their own. So I think the Kurds have to realize they have a limited opportunity also to negotiate something, and their partner might be HTS. To sort of create an arrangement with them. And they have to also realize that this arrangement have to appease the Turks somehow, alleviate some of their fears. I don't see pragmatic leaders emerging along it. Mazloum Abdi, who is in charge, is solid in terms of is loved by the people, but he's not. He doesn't yet show a sign of being a pragmatic and able to withstand because there's a lot of anger among the Kurds because of the loss of territories, and they feel stabbed in the back by Arabs as a result of that, because of the formation of the Syrian National Army.
And again, just for people who don't know, Kurds are not Arabs. They are their own. The Kurdish language is a it's a separate thing. I believe it's Indo-European, and Kurds are in all of these countries, from Iran to Iraq to Turkey to Syria, have a distinct identity, and there's a lot of historic resentment at Arabs and at Turks in particular.
So yeah, I mean, and so basically it boils down to whether, therefore, the HTS and the SDF can find a formula to work. And that requires pragmatism on both sides, not just the HTS, but also the Kurds, and a willingness to sort of settle and compromise for something less than what they think they deserve and are entitled to. And this is always the issue. For any people fighting for autonomy and cultural rights and whatever, is at the end of the day there are power balances, and you have to accept perhaps far less than what you think you're entitled to, what history might prove you're entitled to, because it's not about history. It's really about the balance of power at the end of the day, and about whether you can foresee a future that's better if you made this compromise. So this is where what's needs to happen, and this is going to be a major challenge for the common phase. Now, the other sort of internal challenges in terms of the structural integrity of the country, I would imagine that because of the factionalization that still exists, the possibility of warlordism, it's still there. We cannot dismiss it, but because it seems to me that there is an awareness. However, people are not blind because of what happened in Libya. Al-Jolani and SGS have been, and other factions have been studying, have actually had political science department created in the territories, and because of the avalanche of NGOs that came to Turkey trying to train sort of Syrian activists on different aspects of governance. And I was one of them in 2013, leading sort of efforts along these lines. A lot of Syrians have had exposure to experiences elsewhere. Study this experience. What happened in Libya? What happened this? Why did this
I mean, there are literally 5 million Syrians displaced,
yes.
and a large number of them will come home.
Yeah. In fact, the number is 7 million displaced out of the country and 5 million inside the country. So it's a huge number. But those who were dispersed out of the country had a chance to an exposure to experiences, and there was a systematic attempt by HTS and its cadre over the last few years to study experiences and to learn from them. Because of that, they might actually have a plan in motion, and they seem to actually have a plan in motion right now. They appointed a new PM for the Salvation Government. Ahmad, I'm trying to remember the name, but they appointed a new PM just a couple of hours ago, and they are going to move into civilian rule. They are going to form a transitional government. That's his task. Form a transitional government of notables. So they are already put in there for the infrastructure of governance. They are not waiting. So by moving so fast, by to establish civilian and to governance and to establish dialogue and working on services, something that will appease the local populations and provide food and electricity and water, this will buy them time and to prevent exactly the scenario that happened in Libya. And Libya, it was chaos. No one prepared for anything. There was a transitional plan, but it was on paper, and the military operation preceded it. No one thought that they are going to deal with the actual fall of Gaddafi. So it was chaotic, and I think HTS had years to plan and a vision in order to prevent that kind of chaos. And they seem to be behaving in according with a transitional plan of their own. And that is basically the promising, the silver lining, basically, in the cloud that we can see now.
So when you look at, obviously on a scale of 1 to 10 for how good a thing is the fall of Assad, that's a 10. But when you look at how nervous you are about the future, that's a different scale. And it sounds like you're seeing a lot of reason to be optimistic and a lot of reason to be worried.
Yes, and that's why I say I'm 5.5 optimistic. on a scale of 10, So I'm leaning towards optimism, but I'm really also very skeptical because, well, history tells us also quite a few things. So my wishful thinking is carrying me, or my hopes are carrying me beyond the 50% margin into an area of optimism, but I'm still very much worried about the potential of
what are you
chaos and
kind of
mayhem.
watching for? I mean, other than statements by sort of leadership and prominent people, what are some of the signs that would sort of indicate to you if it's going this way or that way?
Basically, I mean, action. I wanna see action. The statements themselves are nice, but the appointment of a prime minister who's immediately in charge of a transition, that was action that I think it came very fast, and that's positive. Provision of services is also good because that's and yes, while in Aleppo things were fast because of the closeness to Turkey and the ability to connect to the Turkish grid for electricity and so on, it's not going to be as easy in central Syria. It's not going to be as easy in Damascus. So it's going to take a while before services are restored. Electricity used under Assad used to come for 4 hours a day because it also was used as a way to control the population. The bread distribution was sporadic, and you had scuffles around bakeries. But while under liberated areas, which is just a normal thing, you can go and buy. So because in Assad's areas, these basic services and bread was used as an instrument of social control. In liberated areas, it was just a right and people can get it. So provision of services is important action to basically gain credibility in the population, but that doesn't show pragmatism. It just shows intelligence and smart planning. I'm worried about the radical elements. I want to see more action taken to contain people posting videos and saying we want to free Jerusalem and we want to free Mecca and we want the Islamic State. Well, I want to see more action to basically say, no, we're not going down that road. This is important for the international observers. This is important for Israel in order not to have even more incursion and strikes against positions in Syria. And it's important for peace with neighbors. But this is important internally for the local population, because the more these radicals voice their opinion or speaking out and they take part in the public space, the greater the fear will be, especially among those elements that fought for the regime, and they are loyalists, especially among Christians, especially among Alawites, especially among secular elements. So I want to see action here. And I do realize, however, that it might be too early days for the alliance to take action immediately against radicals that were part of the alliance and help take over the country. And they might need them to secure certain areas. But if that kind of reliance, however, bothers me, because if it continues, it means that these radical elements are going to be there for the foreseeable future and probably be part of influence in decision-making process. And they'll take over. I mean, at one point or another. So I want to see action here.
Ev, you get the last question today.
Thanks. I was very curious about the political science department that you've talked about. Could you just say a few words about them?
The who?
The political science department for the.
The political science. In the liberated areas under HTS control and under the control of other groups, Idlib was controlled by local sort of city. Idlib city was controlled by local government structure, not HTS basically, but they were close to them. They established universities and colleges. I mean, and one of them was a political science department that studied the experiences of transitional experiences in other countries and conflict in other countries. They studied constitutional issues. They've learned between 2012 and onward of the need to study these systems in order to develop something more reasonable for Syria. So at first they were approaching these issues with the kind of skepticism, but once they have been exposed and Russia interfered on the side of the regime and they began losing territories and they had this enclave, they realized that they need to understand more about the political system, the global system, international law, in order for them to see the possibilities of challenging the regime in different capacities and having more effective governance internally. So that kind of a system developed. And HTS actually was latecomers to this. They only came, I think, in 2020, began to realize the importance of that. But they were quick learners as well. And their ability is that they absorb people who are already been down that path into their ranks. It's really interesting to see that Syrians have taken political science seriously, and they realize that they really need to understand politics. For a long time, we have been a culture that people were discouraged from thinking about politics. Politics is something the regime does, not you. And then all of a sudden they realize that, come on, this is something, if we don't understand, we will never be able to govern ourselves. So they have been very keen on learning. And, they use Google Translate to read complex documents, and you've always had this request from people, can you help me? Is this translation accurate? Is this... so we've been conducting a lot of webinars, basically trying to educate people on the international system, on the on transitional processes, and so on. So it's been an interesting aspect of our struggle, really.
Ammar Abdulhamid, you're a great Syrian and you're a great American.
Thank you.
And thank you for this incredible briefing. One of the things about being on Dogshirt Daily is that you are always welcome back. The link that you used, if you just click it any day, you'll just show up. We're always live from 8 to 9, and we're going to have a lot of questions about Syria. If you want to suggest other people we should talk to about different aspects of Syrian governance, if you have HTS friends who want to come on the show, we are...
What do you mean HTS friends? They're terrorists. Are you trying to put me in trouble with FBI or something?
No, I'm not suggesting that we give them material support. But if you have, look, I mean, if they're up for dialogue, we are up for dialogue, and come back anytime, and we will invite you back specifically soon.
Yes.
Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. I have no idea who the guest is going to be. I have no idea what the subject is going to be. I have no idea who my co-hosts are going to be. That's what's fun about it. Keep the faith. Things look super stable until they're not. And, Bashar al-Assad won the election with 95% of the vote just 6 months ago, and people are out dancing in the streets at his defeat today. That should be a lesson for you all. You're all great Americans.
Also, Ev and I might launch a coup here.
Anytime you guys want to take over the show, I'm going to be out of the country next week. So, if you guys want to run it without me, feel free. We will be back, guys.